All right, good afternoon and welcome to the third panel for Data Innovation Day 2015. My name is Daniel Castro. I'm the director of the Center for Data Innovation, which hosts Data Innovation Day. This session is titled Wearables, Sensors, and the Internet of Things. I'm joined by a great group of experts, Philip DesAutels, who's the Senior Director of Internet of Things at the Globant Foundation, Mohammed Fustak, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Blue Maestro, Aurelia Moser, who's a map scientist at CartoDB, William Jeffries, the founding officer at Think New York City, Ori Shasho, who's co-founder of Neura, Santiago Piacenza, who is the product practice lead for mobile, wearable, and IoT studios at Globant. So we have a great global perspective here today, and I just want to kick it off, starting with IoT. This was huge at CES this year. It's really picked up over the past year. We're seeing a lot more products available to consumers. But what are the immediate benefits that consumers should be thinking about in terms of the Internet of Things? And Santiago, let me start with you.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? It got...
Yeah. So the question is, what are the immediate benefits that consumers should be looking to experience from the Internet of Things?
I guess regarding the benefits from consumer, it's something that we will start seeing, mainly because there are several aspects. I mean, right now, what we are seeing regarding Internet of Things is that we are seeing a path in which a lot of the devices that we interact and use every day are becoming smarter. I mean, but the truth is that all of these paths needs to converge into one smart thing. If we take, for example, a smart city, we see a lot of things regarding like smart cars, so becoming like traffic control, lighting systems. All of these things are following a path in becoming connected to the internet. This is making that we start having a lot of real-time data or historic data. But we need to all of these pieces to be connected in order to start having more smart cities, for example. But I think that that's when the consumer will start seeing a lot of things that will benefit, mainly because we are also seeing today that a lot of things are starting to be connected, but mainly we are starting to have controls. Our mobile device is starting to have the capability to connect and control a lot of things. But right now, that's the only thing that we were being able to do, control things. Our smartphone is becoming a huge control of things. But we still need to in the future, the goal will be, or the main vision is to remove the control from the cell phone and start having more intelligence, to have more automated things.
Yeah. So let me bring in Mohammed and Philip. You're both working, very heavily in this space of IoT. What's the, one thing that we keep hearing is kind of, is having a smart refrigerator, does this really matter to the consumers? What's the impact that consumers should expect to see in the coming year?
Well, where I see things going from a consumer perspective is really the aspect of convenience. If we think about the various things you have around you, up until now, there are these disparate things, whether it's your refrigerator, your washing machine, whether it's your smartphone, your TV, they have varying degrees of intelligence, but they're all independent items. When you need to move data from, as an example, you want to create a shopping list, you open your refrigerator, you look what's inside, you transfer that data of what you need to something else. Humans are essentially moving the data around manually between things. The Internet of Things, in my view, is all about the connectivity allowing data to flow between things. So that really ultimately, from a consumer standpoint, becomes convenience. If you're, and I don't want to keep using the refrigerator analogy, but if whatever is generating data can send that data automatically to something that can then use the data, and the human being doesn't have to be involved in that movement of the data itself, it becomes a lot more useful to people. And I think as time goes by, more and more of these devices, as they interconnect, will allow the free flow of data between them. The next stage being trying to turn that data into information and using it in useful ways to help consumers.
So Mohammed, building on that, I would summarize it a different way, but I completely agree with the sentiment. And the way I would summarize it is, first, consumers should expect that things work together, and that is to me the most fundamental thing for this whole concept. The big idea of Internet of Things, the alternate marketing explanation of that, or the kind of maybe the wider marketing explanation of that is the Internet of Everything, which is kind of where you're going. Internet of Things more an engineering concept, Internet of Everything more of an emotional concept of things working together. The first is that things need to work together. The second is that the sum of the parts is bigger than the whole, and consumers should expect that. They shouldn't. It shouldn't be a side effect of it. The fact that I have I have a stereo that can send notifications that tells my TV what song I'm listening to, and my TV puts up a little bubble, and that really happens for me now, is pretty awesome. The fact that I didn't have to do anything to make that happen is even better. And that's like a real use case to me. I just want to know what song's playing on the radio right now, and I can get that today. That's awesome. Mosaic Speaker, LG TV, bought them both in retail at Best Buy. They both work together and send notifications. So that's the second one to me in this, is that the sum of the parts is bigger than the whole. And the last one, and Mohammed, I think this goes to your point again completely, is that at the end of the day, consumers shouldn't have to be technical to make this stuff work. It should just work out of the box. And if it doesn't just do that, it's a failure. It's got to be gracefully beautiful from the time you open the box till the time it does something you didn't expect it to do and you're delighted by it.
And we actually, and I absolutely agree, we see that actually in the products that we do. We feel that's an extremely important aspect. That consumers, the general consumer, is not a computer scientist. They're not a electronics engineer that's going to take electronics apart and make it work together. They want to basically put it somewhere and it should just work. So setup, configuration, all of those things have to basically go away. It has to be literally, I mean, the old plug and play concept, but now to everything.
I turn this on, I plug it in, everything in my house finds it, it becomes part of my living room, it's magic. That's what everybody wants. And oh, by the way, when my front doorbell rings, I want to be able to tell this thing to blink.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing is, we need to, what we're living right now is connecting these things to internet, but we still lack the standardization of the brains inside these smart connected things. And that's a path that we definitely need to follow in order to accomplish that people, regular consumer, can just plug and play all of these things.
And actually, you mentioned at CES, I mean, I was there, and one of the things that came out very clear to me at CES is that in this space, there are far too many players right now. There are far too many competing standards out there, and we're going to have to go through this phase probably over the next year or two to end up with one or two that will become, and ultimately maybe even those one or two will unite together. Because until that happens, without this standardization, it's very difficult to achieve what we're talking about of immediate plug and play, everything just working.
That's a great point, and I think this gets to the idea that, so a lot of people are arguing that the Internet of Things, wearables, the connected sensor-based devices, this represents a major revolution, major transformation, but it's going to be long term. It's like with the electrification, the invention of the electrical power and the ability to distribute this and do lighting, that was a starting place. But it was everything that came next. That's where it became really powerful. And we see the similar thing with data, where it's a lot of the data that's coming out of the Internet of Things is coming out of these sensors and wearables. Maybe that's where some of this long-term innovation is going. Aurelia, I want to bring you into this.
But before you go on from there, I think two points. One, it's called the Internet of Things, but most of this doesn't run on the Internet, right? There's no reason for my for the remote control on my phone to talk to the cloud to run on a server that's in some distant place to come back and tell a light that's 2 feet away from me to turn on and off. So most of this smart connected devices, Internet of Things world, is really about proximal networks. And you know, and most of those use cases, until you get into the complicated use cases, most of the use cases that, and I was at CES, hundreds of consumers came up and talked to me, and I'm sure you guys all heard this too. People aren't talking about magical use cases. They're talking about really simple ones. I want to know when somebody's at my front door. I want to know what song is playing. I want to be able to drive away and tell my house to go into away mode. That doesn't require, don't get me wrong, the big data is really important, and especially product companies and people who are building higher order features want that. But at the end of the day, in reality, that's a second order effect. The primary effect are simple use cases that make our lives easier and better.
Well, that's a great point. That actually gets to my question, because you know the question is, you know, is the long-term effect going to be that we just have this convenience, these, you know, first-order conveniences, or is there something, you know, bigger that's happening when we see the digitization of so many different artifacts in our life? You know, there's all of this data become meaningful in other ways. And so, Aurelia, let me go to you, and then also, William, I want to bring you in because you're kind of working in this space as well with some of this data.
I kind of wanted to comment a little bit about what's already been said, too, particularly the mention of proximal devices and that being like the future, because I feel like for a while we've been kind of operating in this elective state where you can have a wearable device and maybe connect it to something else and look at your data and try to cross-reference it with your 23andMe, for example, to see what you're running, how that correlates to your genome or whatever. But I think one of my favorite terms in the Internet of Things that kind of just is a new neologism, or a neologism, I guess, just by itself, is wearables. So the idea that the proximity of these devices and their ability to communicate, or that your just mere presence in the room will allow your device to be reactive to you and to pick up information. I know, like, for example, the Best Connected Home category, I think, the Internet of Things Awards this year had the sunlight, which doesn't rely on user configuration. It changes the hue based on the rotation of the Earth, right? So, or the Amazon Echo that is designed to pick up on your voice, but also all kinds of other data that you don't really have to configure. It just picks up on other devices automatically. So the actual proximity of those devices in a room or to you is what dictates how they respond and how they collect information without user input or dependency on the user. And then, and I was thinking of this anecdote too. I run like a workshop for a robotics team of students at a high school local to here. And one of my favorite stories is that last year we won the robotics competition for the city, not because we built a robot that fought the other robots in this kind of deathmatch scenario better than the others, but because we programmed it to run away from all of the other robots. So all the students won because our robot was proximally aware to other things and was able to modify its behaviors and movements non-violently. It was a non-violent robot. And I think more of those proximity-sensitive devices and the way that they collect data and allow you to mesh it or automate that meshing is really what maybe the future of Internet of Things is.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a scenario that fits in that same model, which I love, is a company who we had in our space at CES makes an brand new, really cool, it's called HeatWorks. It's a hot water heater that uses some new technology. And it's super efficient, it's connected. And their customers are buying them and putting them in line with gas hot water heaters and querying the smart meter on their house to say which is cheaper right now, the price I pay for gas or the spot price of electricity at this time of day, and then making a decision as to which one of those two devices is going to pick on for hot water for them. Well, that's beautiful. That's big data, that's little data, it's spot pricing, it's kind of all of that together, and it's a real-world scenario that's real money, simple scenario. But to your point, right, the house is reacting. I don't even have to do anything after that. I just tell the two to negotiate with the cloud and leave me alone. I don't even want to be part of that. Maybe the gas company is short on gas and wants me to use electricity, and they'll sponsor the electricity. right? Once I can start doing those things, it becomes really cool. And so I love those reactive scenarios that you're describing, because those are the unintended great consequences when things can work together.
Well, Philip.
Yeah, Philip.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You brought up an interesting point, I think, which is taking things. And I think, Aurelia, you spoke to this too. A lot of people have spoken to this, that things can connect directly, and in fact, they connect much faster if they connect directly over Bluetooth or Zigbee or whatever protocol you want to use, and that is really powerful because not only does it make things faster, but it makes things more private. And privacy is a major issue as we take these devices that normally we had a lot more control over, and we background them. So previously,
do we really want the cloud knowing we're fat?
What? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So previously, when you wanted to interact with technology, you opened a box and you typed into it, and it was input and output, and it was very conscious. And now, with the advent of wearables and these technologies that operate entirely in the background, you can very easily lose track of what information is being put out there. And this is a question that's relevant to HeatSeek, because we are taking readings for indoor temperature that could potentially show that someone is breaking the law, because landlords who own the buildings are required to heat the buildings to a certain temperature, and in fact, that's the whole reason we're monitoring. So if that information...
Overview real quick of what HeatSeek does?
Yeah, absolutely. So in big cities like New York, old cities like New York, there are a lot of buildings that are still outfitted with old school steam heat, and it's very difficult to make sure that all of the units are at a safe temperature during the winter. And what we discovered is that especially in lower income areas, you have people who are getting really sick and even dying. There are major health consequences associated with improper heating in the home. And it's just not getting addressed because there's no real data. So what we did was, instead of having tenants manually log the temperature in their apartments and then using that as evidence, which is understandably seen as very flimsy, we use the Internet of Things to automate the process. So there is a little sensor in your house, and it takes the readings and determines whether or not they're in violation of the housing code. And then all that information can be piped to governments or advocacy groups that can use that for enforcement. And it can also just go directly to the landlord, who can use it to make sure that they're complying, which is sometimes hard to do with these old buildings.
Or to tune their heating system, or to, all of those other things, to know who's leaving windows open and wasting heat.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
All of that gets into privacy issues, because you're talking about putting something in someone else's home and collecting data from it, and then essentially giving it to other people while they are not. It's not like they opened that box and they're doing that input-output. It's not a conscious thing. That box is always there. It's easy to forget about. And the same thing happens with the Fitbit in your pocket, or step tracker in your shoe, or the boiler that is determining which source of electricity or gas to use to heat your house. And that information in the wrong hands can be scary.
And that's why this notion, and I come back to it again, but this notion of the proximal network versus everything on the internet is fundamental, both from a technical point of view of just making this stuff work, but also from the ability to have fine-grained privacy controls, and then the protocols being used, whatever they are. I would advocate for all join. That's my unnecessary plug there for my alliance. I would, all join, like some of the other protocols, has fine-grained controls to decide what of things from the proximal network have access to the internet, and what things on the proximal network can be accessed to from the internet. And so those fine-grained controls at least create the mechanism by which a user can start to make conscious decisions about that.
Let me take that conversation, Philip, though, sorry, and raise it up a level. Maybe you can jump in already here. But don't you think that there's putting in these mechanisms and privacy, and all of these are great points, but how are users going to know what to choose, what to allow, etc.? I think there's a massive education issue here.
Oh, I 100%. I 100% agree. Here's my iPad.
Yeah.
Yesterday I got a great UI notification. I had never seen it, and it said an app, and I won't disclose the app's name. It said a certain app is tracking your location live now. Do you want to allow it to do that or not? And it was in the background that it was a nonsensical app. There was no reason that that app should be actively tracking my location.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said no. And I'm pretty tech savvy, and I didn't realize that that app had done that. The interface for the control unit for my apps chose to expose that to me and let me know that I was at risk, and it did in a nice way. And so I think there's education and also conscious design to make sure that people get the right information.
Right. That's what I was going to say, is that there's going to be, I think for IoT, IOE, NOE, however way you want to phrase it as a term, I think really the big transformation that's going to have to happen for it before it becomes widely adopted is educating people. The consumer base has to start understanding how these things will help them, what potentially they're going to be exposing and using them, how, and of course designs have to incorporate mechanisms that allow the users to have the control to adequately protect themselves and at the same time benefit from what's there. And this all has to happen over the next few years, in addition to all the platform wars and all the other, what's the right standard, before any of this really takes off, in my opinion.
I was going to say, if I may interject again, I think anyone who works in software or hardware development knows that most people are pretty comfortable investing in infrastructure that they have no concept of or understand. I mean, we're all comfortable with owning iPhones, and most of us don't know how they operate or how much data they're logging, or haven't read the epic long privacy statement that says that they give your data to the NSA anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And the most recent, I think, EFF article about healthcare.gov is sending and selling your information to third parties, and we're all obliged to be part of it. So your information is being siphoned away from you regardless of whether you invest in a wearable or not. I actually saw a recent defense by a law student of using the Third Amendment to argue against the sort of Internet of Things anonymous collection of data, because the Third Amendment talks about restrictions against quartering troops in your house, and the idea that you would set up this automation device that would allow troops to kind of enter your house by reviewing your data, things that were coming out of your house. And I thought that was an interesting defense. I think increasingly we're going to see maybe more creative uses of legal restrictions and amendments based on the developments in the Internet of Things and what kind of data we get. But to William's earlier point about how a lot of these automation collection services start out with altruistic motives, or at least like goals of standardizing some kind of monitoring system and ensuring its integrity. We worked on a project earlier this year to map 60 years worth of agricultural sensor data from East Africa. So it was taking in a lot of water and environmental sensors to assess the agricultural integrity of a particular part of Tanzania. And the data was predictably such a mess, because in the 60s, they were collecting it on notebooks and then transcribing it to spreadsheets later on. So we had every date format you can imagine, and values had all the data types you could imagine. So that had to be cleaned and standardized for 60 years. And what we found in kind of mapping all of that data and standardizing it to one form was that there were huge gaps in the way that certain collectors had been collecting the data, or not collecting it at certain stations. And they were all employed with the same benefits and same salaries, same number of employees, but certain stations were completely defaulting on their obligation to collect these data in a regular fashion. And that wasn't really sensible when you have all of these different data types and nobody's analyzing it. But when you automate that process, in the past 10 years, they've started to automate it. You start to get the same data structure for all of the data that you're taking in from the different stations. And it's much easier to monitor those inconsistencies and to see where people are defaulting on their responsibility. So I think one hopeful thing is that we're going to start seeing more standardized data formats. I know Mohammed earlier commented about there's too many standards, and I think that's like the refrain of software development, too many standards. at least for me. But I think there's some hope in the way that devices are going to be able to structure your data for you without you having to do that yourself.
Yeah, I would. I think that was an excellent point. I liked what you said earlier on about the way that a lot of these data collection efforts started out with really altruistic motives. And I think all of us who got into Internet of Things did it because we wanted to build things that were going to make people's lives better. We all have altruistic purposes. And it's really important that we keep sight of those, because we are the ones who are constructing this future that could very quickly turn into a dystopia. And it's something that we're very cognizant of at HeatSeek. You know, the way that we handle our data, we're trying to be very responsible about it. And you know, I hear these stories. There was an article recently about an organization that had started off doing facial recognition interpretation. So a computer would look at your face and it would be able to tell what emotions you were experiencing. And they got their algorithms better than people, so that micro expressions, expressions that were only on the face for milliseconds, were being picked up and interpreted better, more accurately by computers than by humans. And originally the intention for this technology was to help people with autism and other kinds of emotional disorders, social disorders, to better interpret social interactions and better be able to integrate with society. And the technology was co-opted and used to better target advertising, so that people could look and see, like, what's going on with this guy's face? Is he into this product? Maybe we should change our messaging. And like, if you're doing that in a study group setting, I can see that being a responsible, good use of the technology. But what's really scary is that we have cameras all around us, oftentimes on the computer that we're seeing those ads on, or on the TV that we're watching that show on. And we're very close to a world in which advertisers can start literally spying on you in order to sell you things better. And that is a slippery slope.
William, we're going to have
I believe that we are there long ago.
Direct Marketing Institute on our last panel today. So if you send a question, I'll ask her about this and how they're responding to that. And I know they are taking a number of efforts through voluntary, self-regulatory codes to try and map out what things are off the table. I think that's really important going forward, because you're right, most people getting into space are doing it for altruistic purposes, and we all want to make sure it continues to move in that direction. I want to go to the question of security, which has come up in a lot of conversation. And again, this gets to an issue where nobody going in this space is trying to design insecure products. So how do we incentivize companies to really build good security into the consumer devices, so that not only what consumers buy just works automatically, but it's also secure out of the box?
I think you have to. I think that the question just wrapped up a whole bunch of things that are very hard to answer, because what does secure out of the box mean? Security, privacy, the longevity of data, the fact that your thermostat company is now owned by somebody else, and your data is now in a different context. Both security and privacy are intimately intertwined and fit over a whole gamut. There's just the device level security, and I think most engineers building products try very hard to do the right thing there. And as the frameworks get better and the platforms get better, they'll just do that because it'll be in there. Very few of us worry about whether our HTTP stack is secure or not. We just use one of the well-known stacks and it works. But whether my website is secure and privacy conscious, and the cloud service that's attached to the website is secure and privacy conscious, and the business associated with all of that at any given time is secure and privacy conscious, are completely different problems. So I think it's important to separate those from the infrastructure of, can we build secure things? And the answer is yes, and there's lots of good ways to do that. And these harder questions that everybody's talking about here, about the business and the policies associated with the rest of that story.
I think, Philip, though, to add, so taking your point and going in a slightly different tangent, we mentioned earlier about convenience and things working without human intervention to configure, etc. So you always got to be careful with security, because you can take things to such extents with security that things now become very, very difficult to use and very, very difficult to configure. So I would actually take a step back and say, ultimately, it's going to come down to what's the value of the data. We just think of data. There's probably going to be data that has so little value that is not, and the value could be tied to how long that data is alive. That data could be discarded, for instance, and destroyed, and at that point its value is gone. Or it could be data that's around for the next 100 years. So I think looking at it from a data perspective, we're going to have to start classifying data in terms of its value, and then securing it based on that value. So people will be more than willing to apply high amounts of security and whatever that entails when they think there's a lot of value to what they're securing. They're going to, on the other hand, be very, very much against the idea of applying large amounts of security and all of the problems that it entails to things that have no value at all. That will be seen as completely inconvenient to them. So I think we have to think about it from a data perspective.
Sorry, one sec. Sorry.
Let me get Ori on this too, because you've been trying to jump in on this. I mean, your company is, all about adding more intelligence to smart technology, and so I can see that being applied both to, the functionality of the devices as well as perhaps security. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, correct. I think that we have been facing that all of this discussion narrows down to a conflict in a way between intelligence and the need for comfort and magical use cases or just simple use cases, as Philip mentioned. And on the other hand, we have privacy and security. Now, we do know one thing from our own internet that we have been experiencing in the past 30 years. It's not secure, everything is hackable, and it's not private. The value of the data is enormous, and organizations are using it in order to produce dollars. And I'm an optimistic guy, but I tend to believe that things will keep working the same way. I mean, the Internet of Things will become the Internet just with things. And I think that there is one thing that may turn the wheel around and make a difference, and it is something very, very inherent in the architecture of the Internet. And hopefully, we will see the Internet becoming a human-centric set of networks. So I'm imagining, sandboxes, silos revolving around me, the Internet of me, something that enters around me that is distributed and not accessible through one almost single cloud. And I think that once this happens, we gain two very important things. First, data ownership. I will be the one analyzing my own data and generating my own intelligence and knowledge. I will be the one deciding which piece of intelligence and knowledge goes where. Am I willing to expose the fact that I'm on the way to my gym with my glucometer so you can alert me if my sugar is too low? Yeah, I would. I want that. But I want to expose it only to my glucometer. Not to the glucometer company, not to the cloud of HealthKit or any other kind of third party that can do whatever he wants with it. And another good example would be just take the average home use case. A thermostat that wants to know that I'm on the way back home, that family's on a holiday, or that I'm just working out on the treadmill. In a user-centric network, it would be accessing me. I would have an API, not Google Fit, not Apple Health. And I think this would be the thing that will enable both intelligence, because I trust myself. If I would have a service that would be generating intelligence for me, I would be willing to expose a lot of my information to it. And this is at least our approach and my personal hope that the things will become.
So, Ori, your point matches in a different way with the one I was going to talk about, which is, Mohammed, I completely agree with your point, but I say that, you know, there are these proximal networks. You said the Internet of Me. I would talk about, you know, the network in my house behind the firewall of things that don't go out beyond the edge. You know, my file server in my house is independent because it's not backed up to the cloud from the internet. And as long as somebody doesn't get into my network, then it's secure. And so this idea of zones of control, proximal networks, plays into this very heavily. I want the intelligence that Ori's company makes to, I want that intelligence to run in my products, but I want it to do in those zones that I'm comfortable with. And Aurelia, to a point you made, right? Look, I signed up for 23andMe. I wanted to know. I'm willing to share a lot of data. You can argue that that's the biggest data dump you can share in the world, and yet I was okay with the terms of that sharing because of the way they were going to use it, and I had confidence in that. And so to the other side of this, informed consent is a good thing. And that's really where it comes down to. I didn't have to read all the terms of the service. I just had to read the cliff notes that they provided me to know that, okay, I felt good with that.
I was going to say, to extend that point, and thank you for mentioning that, because it made me think of kind of the social data that we're really willingly giving up all the time. I think to what Mohammed said about how we need to establish kind of a hierarchy of data that we provide people and decide, you know, what can we release. But I think a lot of people really don't know how their data could be used. So we've been giving Facebook, you know, photo data on us for the past 10, 12 years at least. So they have 12 years of aging data. What kind of, you know, algorithm could you develop to detect aging and to predict, you know, what you'll look like when you're 60 now? Based on all of this data we've just been freely dumping on them. And no one, you know, really thinks about that when they log into Facebook. They don't think about the profile they're developing for photo recognition and surveillance of the future. So it's really hard to establish those hierarchies, or even to define what privacy and security is reasonable as a standard for everyone. I think those are pretty subjective, in the same way that quality of life, you know, a measure of quality of life on maps or in, you know, international surveys indicates usually that technical or technological penetration does not correlate always with people's happiness in a place. So I'm not sure that, you know, it's easy to establish those standards.
Well, I mean, so take a simple object, a light bulb. I don't care if the light bulb data goes up and somebody uses it, unless somebody is nefarious and uses that data to build a pattern of when I go to work every day, and then they know when I'm not there at my house, and then they use that to establish the perfect time to rob me. Or when somebody else decides they're going to sue me and claim that I was or wasn't home at a given time when I claimed I was or wasn't home, and all of a sudden that data is coming back to be really dangerous for me in some way or another. And so seemingly simple little tidbits of data, Mohammed, I agree with you, it's a very complex, layered story. And that's why I think these shells of what I'm willing to share and what I'm not willing to share and what can go out and what can't go out will become more important to people, because you won't know what you should and shouldn't share.
So this is where I was saying earlier about education, and ultimately, it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve. I mean, the case was brought up about the internet and how the internet has itself evolved, and you can look at that as a case study of perhaps where the Internet of Things is going to go. It may just be that people will find that the convenience and of what they're being provided with is so compelling to them that they're just willing to give up privacy and data access and say, you know what, I'm giving that all away on the internet already, whether it's additionally given out through my house, I'm fine with that. And by the time they realize that what they've done, it may be too late. Or it could be we go the completely the other way. People become so paranoid about it, you know, and so fear-stricken about this private information that's going to be available to everybody that people will go the other way and say, you know what, I don't want these things. I want to keep it completely confined, and we may go in the opposite direction. So it'll be interesting to see over the next few years which of these two forces is going to win out. Are we going to provide such compelling reasons for people to bring in devices into their home, even though they may be giving up privacy of their information, or are they going to just refuse to take it?
Well, so that gets to the question: is there going to be a killer app for IoT or a killer app for wearables? I mean, do we see anything on the horizon? This has been, something that we've been through a couple of years of product development. Is there something that's emerging that's really compelling for consumers across the board, or that you think we're moving towards?
I think in the IoT, it's interesting. A separate thing is happening, right? We had incandescents, then we had these beautiful CFLs, and now we have these gorgeous LEDs. And I was at Home Depot yesterday getting a bulb, and I can buy an LED bulb for $5 now. I can buy a connected one for $14, right? Like smart connected light bulb, $14. And again, I keep going back to this point, and I don't mean to be repetitive, but I think the killer apps are super simple use cases that add real utility. They're the ones that I don't really have to. They're not complex, and I imagine in the wearable space it's the same thing, right? It's the super simple use cases that people really are going to hitch to first, and they're going to get giant traction. Light bulbs is to me the very first one of those, where the LED light bulb has one, and the difference between an LED light bulb and a smart connected LED light bulb is almost nothing.
Well, actually, Philip, I go even one stage further. What you said earlier, I think actually the killer app is the non-app. It's essentially the situation where you acquire a few pieces of equipment, you drop them off somewhere, and they just magically do what they're supposed to do, and you don't do anything, and you don't need to know. Let the room turn its lights off by itself. Why do I need to hit the switch? If it knows I'm not there, turn the lights off. And when I walk into the room, turn the lights back on. Let it know what light level I like, and just for that. I mean, yeah, I'm going a little bit far-fetched now, but the point is, I think people will adopt technology when actually the technology is almost so seamless that they don't have to worry about it or be concerned with it.
You open the box and it works.
Exactly.
We will see. I don't think that we can expect people to really control their data and manage their privacy and security. People will fall in love with simplicity, and people will fall in love with comfort, and will give up all of their data, as we just did.
Yeah.
People, there's a lot of people in the world with a Nest thermostat. I have several of them. Mohammed, they're exactly what you described, right? Open up the box, screw it on the wall, spend 5 minutes putting it on the wall, walk away, and it learns in a very short amount of time what a comfortable room is for you, and you don't have to think about it again. And it's beautiful, but on top of that, it just works. I haven't thought about the thermostat in months.
Right. Now, it is of course sending all your data outside of your house, and it is going onto a cloud server somewhere, and who knows what that data will be used for. But you've decided that is not as important as the comfort and the benefits you're getting from using it.
I completely into Ori's point, right? I bought it, I put the box on the wall, I actually know exactly what the terms of that service are, and I said, okay, I don't care. I'm happy with that, because the utility given to me, that simple use case of my house is just comfortable. I have a beautiful product, my house is just comfortable, and if I'm away somewhere and I care, I can check on it because I'm worried. That little combination alone makes it happy enough that the data that I share in trade for that is okay for me.
Right.
When we were fundraising for our seed stage round, then we were asked by investors, the classic question, so what is going to be the engagement? How much engagement will users have with your app? And we were like, the less the better. I mean, it's an intelligence, it's a brain, okay? How much engagement do you have with your brain? Nothing, right? It works. Out of the box, or inside the box.
I mean, to your thermostat example, Ori, what you said earlier is that ultimately, Philip, you decided that the value of the data that is going out from your thermostat is not something that you're so concerned about that you want to restrict it, and you get more benefit from letting it go out than it is by keeping it in.
Yeah, and honestly, I'd like to be able to. I wish I had the ability to share that data with people, people like William, who might be able to do something useful with that data. Like, I would even be happy with that, because William's not going to sell me, gas in the pipe at a different price, and I trust William. He has a nice face, and I'm willing to share it with William. So and I mean that honestly. Like that's part of the better good. And to this point earlier of the better good, again, that's as long as somebody can't pick me out of the stream of everybody because they want to do something nefarious, then I'm even willing to contribute that to a greater good. And you know what? If I get a different ad because of the time of day I'm in, and that's the price I have to pay for that utility, I'm okay with that, honestly. That's a fair trade.
That is a great example, because I think that what you're saying right now, if you're willing to share that thing with William, then this goes back to what I meant when I said user-centric network. You will allow a transaction between Philip Network to William Network.
Yes.
And that will be like a VPN between you and him, and data that you have generated will move through you because you decided to share it with him, and that's it.
So we just have a few minutes left. I want to bring the conversation to a slightly different place. Same with consumer devices, but one of the themes that we're talking a lot about today on Data Innovation Day is ensuring broad access to the benefits of data-driven innovation, including with the Internet of Things and wearables. So as we talk about the new products and services that are coming out here, how can we make sure that this is something that's not something that's only available to wealthy individuals or certain populations, that's not available just in certain nations? How do you really ensure that the benefits of the Internet of Things are extended globally?
I think we only need to. I think the market moves in wonderful ways, and we only need to look at the fact that there are more cell phones on the planet than there are people. And I work with a labor rights organization. The number one thing that an immigrant does when they come to the United States after they find shelter and a job is buy a smartphone so they can talk to everybody else that they know in the world, right? Their family, their friends. They can find information. The commoditization of technology, but by this stuff being popular, it becomes cheap, and by becoming cheap, it becomes accessible, and by becoming accessible, it becomes ubiquitous. $5 LED light bulbs, 2 years ago they were $100. They're $5 today, and that's retail. It's just going to get better.
Well, I will add to that. Not only will obviously the price of things drop as volumes increase, which will happen, but I think also if you go to other countries, if you go outside of the developed world, go to the underdeveloped world, there could be a lot of side benefits that people get who don't necessarily acquire the technology themselves. If municipalities or others start deploying these technologies, the benefits will still benefit people. So I think that there's really two different ways in which the rollout of technology will directly impact people. Either they themselves acquire it because the price point keeps dropping far enough down that it's something that they can simply deploy themselves, or the price is low enough down that organizations themselves in other countries can start widely deploying it. Whether it's, for instance, sensors in farming that are deployed at a community level that benefit all the local farmers by giving them accurate data, even though the farmers themselves are doing nothing, just consuming the actual data that's provided to them. So I think there are ways like that where it will roll out.
I think we're even going to see a process in which there is a commoditization of sensors and an overpopulation of sensors. So I had my Adidas shirt and my Reebok shoes that I run with, and my Timberland shoes that I go to the office with, and at some point I'm going to have more sensors than shoes in my closet, and I will be facing the tough decision of, hey, where do I want to consume my step data today? And I may, at least in my case, for now I have two sensors on me, and we are in 2015.
And that, Ori, that's actually a great point you bring up for a future discussion segment, which is if things go the way I think we're thinking they will go, the explosion of devices that generate data is going to be exponential. It's going to be like nothing we've seen before. And now that in itself introduces a whole new set of problems of managing that data, synthesizing it, making useful information out of it. And I think that's something to look forward to perhaps in the next few years. Because if you talk about the Internet of people and billions of people, now you could easily get into the Internet of trillions of devices. So something else to think about.
Yeah, I mean Google's work on the flu.
Because the next panel that's starting right now is all around innovations in analytics, visualizations, and big data technology, which is Basically, what do we do with all this data? How do we manage it? And do we have the technology to keep up? I want to thank all of you for your contributions today. Really appreciate the discussion. This is something that we're going to be continuing in the months and probably years ahead. So thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you more.
Thank you.
Thank you.